Now, you may be wondering, what if we used the default route table instead of creating a new one? Because we already have one that we get out of the box for our VPC, right? Generated by AWS. So why can't we just add a new route to the default route table instead of creating a new one? And that is an option if you want to use the default route table. And I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So let's go back to our Terraform config. And let's actually remove this one here, the association, as well as remove the route table resource. Or let's actually comment this out to see the difference. So first I'm going to apply this, and the route table and association with subnet will be removed. And then we'll just edit the default route table. So I'm going to refresh this again. And there you go. We have one route table, the default one, and that's it. However, we still have our internet gateway, and we're going to associate this, or we're going to configure this in the default route table. So we're going to make a second entry in these routes. And the way we can configure the default route table is using a resource called AWS default route table. And again, all of these components, all of these resource types, you can look them up in the documentation. And let's call it default route table, or we can also call it main route table. And there are a couple of attributes we need here. So in the new route table that we defined, we had VPC ID configured. However, here we don't need a VPC ID because we're referencing an existing route table, right? So instead we have default route table ID. So we need the ID of that route table. And we can get that ID actually from the VPC object. And the way we can do that is actually, let's clear this up, and using Terraform state show command, we can actually reference the VPC object. So if I do Terraform state show and the resource name, I can see all the attributes that this resource has. However, I need to have that resource existing in my AWS account, otherwise I won't be able to get any list. But since the VPC exists, I get the list of all its attributes. And one of them, as you see here, is default route table ID. So that's how I know how to access the route table ID in my VPC. So I'm going to copy that and AWS VPC type. Let's actually copy this and copy that again. And there you go. So this is our VPC object, and we're referencing an existing route table ID of the main route table like this. So we don't have to know the ID value actually. So that's the first attribute. And actually the only attribute that is different from creating a new route table, the rest of the stuff are actually the same. So again, we are adding a new route, just like we did with the previous one. The default one is already there, so we don't have to specify or change or do anything about it. And we can also give it a tag. We can actually call it main RTB. And I'm gonna save this, and let's actually plan first and see the preview of this. Let's see, we have default route table as a new resource, and let's do apply. And let's actually refresh. So as you see, what happened is that the previous route table got removed and the new one got created in its place, which is also a main one. That's why we saw the create and not modify or change. And if we scroll in the route section here, you see the default, local routing, and gateway configuration right here. And we have the name tags as well, and we're using the main route table. And in the subnet associations, we haven't defined any explicit subnet association for this route table. However, subnets in that VPC, all the subnets that are not explicitly associated are automatically assigned to main route table, which happens to be this one. So we don't have to explicitly do the association again because it will happen by default. So this is basically how you can use the default resource, in this case a default route table, instead of creating a new one. And now we can actually remove this block of code here.